more autonomy to set a boundary and say, well, I'm going to just go get a different job.
Welcome back to Leadership Beyond Burnout. I'm your host, Dr. Kimberly L. Wilson, and I want to welcome back our fired up friends, our regular viewers, as well as those who are new to the show. And if you're not familiar, here we focus on leadership beyond burnout, wellness, mental health, and relationships. Today's episode is sponsored by Team Neurodivergent. I want to start off by introducing our guest for today. We have Meghan Bonde. Meghan is a Tedx speaker and neurodivergent learning and development specialist who helps leaders attract, retain, and grow gifted and twice exceptional employees through her Grow Top Talent program. As a creative, empathetic, and courageous leader, she has influenced thousands of leaders globally through her facilitation of transformational learning with a focus on equity and inclusion. Meghan creates meaningful change and unlocks the potential of individuals and organizations alike. Beyond her professional pursuits, Meghan is a fam jam dancer and lifelong learner. Most proud of her leadership successes within her amazing neurodivergent family. And without further ado, let us welcome Meghan Bonde to our stage.
Having a healthy and, happy life. So, we miss out on a lot of people's gifts because of misidentification.
There was a TED Talk, and I can't even remember the lady's name. She was in a wheelchair, and she shared how when she goes to the bank that she has to, her hand is flopping trying to get attention so that they can see her. And so she said that the environment is disabling. She's not disabled in the environment. If they just lowered the counters, then she'd be perfectly capable of transacting. And that was just mind-blowing to me. I didn't think about just that simple shift is life-changing for someone.
Right. And the same thing is possible for the invisible differences for people who are neurodivergent. And a lot of times people think it's going to be like really complex or really costly to make these adjustments, but there's so many simple things that we can do to just create more inclusive environments for neurodivergent people. And it really helps everybody. It's not that we have to take away something from somebody who doesn't need that support. And it really is about using that universal design for learning approach that we can design more flexible environments that are inclusive for everybody.
And it also seems like having that flexibility and shifting slightly also for the person who isn't neurodivergent or neuronormative, that their ways of thinking get expanded because they learn to listen more, they learn to identify and just be a lot more empathetic. I see you shaking your head.
Yeah, I mean, for us to pay attention to differences and needs is only going to help everybody unmask. And even differences like introverts versus extroverts, or um, the visual people versus auditory people. I mean, there's so many uh, differences that we can notice, celebrate, acknowledge, include, and it just opens up the conversation to be able to empathize more and include everybody.
Right. I've those who work with me pretty much know I have this statement where I say, "Okay, hold on, I have to close my eyes so I can hear you and actually visualize what they're telling me so that it clicks. Otherwise, sometimes it's just flying over my head. Like, can you repeat that again?"
Mm-hmm.
So they've accommodated me quite well with that. I'm curious. I just mentioned the Tedx speaker that I saw, and I'm wondering, how do your experiences as a Tedx speaker and neurodivergent learning specialist, how does that shape your approach to nurturing the development of employees in like high pressure environments?
So the TEDx experience was really transformative for me to just sort of own my story and my identity and share it with the world and be vulnerable. And so going through the process of starting with an idea and talk that was still me hiding, to sort of shaping it to be able to really share my heart and put myself out there was really a growth experience for me. And as I just share and support people to create inclusive learning experiences for people, I continue to learn and grow too. I believe that educating and learning is not about an expert having all of the knowledge and dumping it into the learners so that they, gain this information. It's
Mhm.
about being a facilitator and asking questions and providing space and structures that allow people to process and think. And the conversations and just the results that people have shared when I give the assessment at the end of what they learned is huge mindset shifts, amazing ideas that I would have never come up with for how to
Mhm.
apply the learning in their unique circumstances and environments, just new ways of thinking about things, and having it set up and structured where there's little bits of information, and then there's silent think time where people can write or process, and then there's small group sharing where it's cooperative learning structures and people have time to listen to each other and sentence frames to help them think through how to respond. All of those different supports that I use to really create inclusive learning experiences absolutely transform how people think about it
Mhm.
and help them come up with just amazing applications that really can change the effectiveness of teams that they're on.
So, are you saying that being in a room where someone puts you on the spot and says, "What do you think about this? And what's your solution?" It may not be the most effective way to get the best out of your team?
That is a very small percentage of people that think on their feet and get their best ideas in that sort of environment. And it's really important to allow people to go deep and process and have think time and learn from the different perspectives and just have an expansive opportunity to think through things. And um, it it's definitely a skill that not a lot of leaders have, and it's not their fault. It hasn't been taught to them. So, learning and development is complex, and it's okay to need support in learning those things.
Right. I think I am probably famous for coming back to somebody, oh, and this, because I just couldn't think of it at the time. But after
Yep.
you had some time to reflect and let my brain rest, it's like, oh, here's this wonderful thing that's come to mind. Let me share that.
Hmm. Yep.
I think that's that
Absolutely.
way for a lot of people.
Absolutely.
So, what are some, have your recovery practices for burnout and just resilience, have they changed or shifted since you found out you were neurodivergent, or do you maintain the same practices?
I've really shifted my environment around me. And I did need to have recovery time where there was just a lot of rest and reflection, and I needed support from different service providers to help me get through it. But now I need to sort of build in small routines that are prevention or catching myself early when I'm getting tired. And a lot of the prevention is around designing my environment and designing my routine for my unique brain and knowing that my needs matter, my needs are okay, even if they're different or they seem like more needs than other people around me, that's okay to have those unique needs. And so it's really been a complete shift and becoming self-employed and starting my business has really helped me to figure out through trial and error what is it that works for me to maintain my energy.
And it is freeing, I think, to be able to shape your own environment and create your own workflow and systems. I believe most people go to the system that wasn't effective and that was burning them out initially because that's all they know, and then they're
Right.
just like, well, why am I doing this to myself again?
Mhm.
I can do something different.
That's
And
right.
it's so freeing. Can so I'm really curious about you sharing some type of transformative moment in your leadership style that led to some type of profound growth and inclusion for teams on a local or global scale.
Yeah. So I think some of the biggest shifts that I've seen is around that deficit versus strength based lens of disability or neurodivergent people. And when I facilitate a workshop where people get time to learn about the social model of disability, meaning that the problem is with the environment. We need to lower the counters or we need to make adjustments to the environment. And then people aren't disabled. They're disabled by the environment. It's not something that's wrong with them. And I hear shifts from leaders that say, I used to think that, there was something wrong that needed to be fixed and we just needed to support this person's growth in this area. And now I think that actually their different way of thinking and learning is a strength that helps out our team. And I need to be the one to ask them, what barriers are happening and what ideas do you have to make this meeting more effective for you or supportive for you, or how can we support your growth? And so just that shift from the deficit focus to, wait a minute, actually having differences is a strength that actually brings unique ideas and helps support innovation. That is the biggest breakthrough in my mind, and it'll impact behaviors, across the board throughout the day in the workplace.
Mm. And I remember in an exercise in college when they were trying to ensure that clinicians were able to spot the strengths in clients, especially those when they do home-based work. And there was a picture, and there were so many things going on in this picture, and typically what would happen is, oh my goodness, she's not watching that pot on the stove, and the dad is smoking, and so, but we needed to flip that around and say, wow, the parents are present. I see that she's holding the child, not that there's dirty dishes in the sink or this is going on, because I think it actually impacts people very negatively if you start off with what's wrong with them rather than how can we build upon what you're doing well.
Absolutely.
Mm. And I think it's a short shift, but it's something that doesn't happen enough in our world.
And it's a continuous learning process because I still continue to grow. I've internalized these beliefs my whole life. And as a parent of neurodivergent kids, I'll catch myself noticing something they're doing wrong or
Mhm.
seeing a trait that they have as a deficit. Same with my husband. It's a continuous process to unlearn and relearn to see people's strengths and communicate my own needs effectively while honoring theirs.
Hmm. That it's not a violation or disrespect to your way of operating.
Mhm.
I think that's very hard for a lot of people. Do you believe that um, previously you talked about um, strengths and not calling things disabilities? So I'm curious if you feel like the federal definitions of people's challenges, does that perpetuate uh, thinking that there's something wrong with that individual?
Yeah, and the DSM, just the guide that's people use to identify neurodivergent people and people with disabilities. It's not strength-based language. It oftentimes it'll be things like rigid thinking versus preference for sameness and routine. And just that shift in language makes
Wow.
a huge difference in how we see people.
Wow. That was illuminating right there. It was such a subtle shift that meant the same thing, but it actually felt different in my body
Mhm.
when you said it. That is highly impactful. Um, I could see how when you come in, you just create this whirlwind and help teams and people begin to think just differently about how they show up for clients as well as showing up for themselves in the world. Has there been an increase in productivity, you feel like, when once leaders begin to understand that people have different learning styles and needs?
Well, the productivity and effectiveness is easily going to follow when people are aligning their environments and their workflows and their roles with their strengths. And oftentimes, small shifts in how the meetings are set up or how someone is supported with a project or the tools that they're given can really make a huge change in their energy level, their
Mhm.
excitement for work, their engagement. And obviously, that's going to only accelerate success. In some cases, it's common to feel like we have to slow down to
Mhm.
then accelerate. We have to pause and reflect and evaluate where we're at and what changes are need to be made. And so sometimes it feels like, oh no, we're going to lose productivity if we take some time to focus on this. But it really is that pause before just a big acceleration of success when people are energized and working effectively together.
Mm. It made me think of a race, how when they start off, they're just still, and then all of a sudden it's just an explosive. They're just running out the gate because they're in
Mhm.
their element. Yeah,
Mhm.
I was imagining that all of the situations where leaders and or other colleagues might get irritated with the process or not understanding this difference. So, is there a way to begin to shift the mindset of the team about why are we doing this differently, so that they adopt practices or the process of relearning the way things are done.
So I think the grow interview process that I use really helps with that because the leader interviews each person on their team about themselves. And who
Mhm,
doesn't like to feel seen and heard and valued? To take 45 minutes to go through an interview with somebody and really get to know them and understand them. When we give someone the opportunity to build their own self awareness about their own needs and what energizes them and any barriers to them really thriving at work, that's only going to help build up their empathy for other people to
mhm,
also have the same experience. And so I really believe in the change process being grassroots at
mhm,
organizations and starting with just one leader of one team of 5 or 10 people who want to, take time to just interview and really get to know somebody with deep critical thinking and self-reflection questions, and then coming together and thinking, how are we going to use this information to make some small tweaks? And that's qualitative data that they're collecting during those interviews to
right.
then make some adjustments that are data informed, not just throwing spaghetti at the wall and coming up with things that they think will make it more inclusive for all the different minds, and really thinking, okay, for our team and for our individual people that we're working with, these are the adjustments. And people need to be, collaborators. That's part of the grow interview process, is to ask the questions and not problem solve during the interview, but
Mm,
then have a follow up where you're collaboratively problem solving. You're inviting the person who maybe came to some new insights about their needs and what energizes them just through the process of being asked the questions, to then identify, what ideas do you have for some small adjustments? And when people do it collaboratively, that's when buy-in happens. And it's not some mandated training that everybody has to go to, but it's
mhm.
really grassroots, starting at the level of each team member on a small team.
I could see how that provides a use case for expansion into the larger part of the organization, because you have this little small, like you said, a small team to really evaluate what are the impacts of implementing doing things a little differently. Um, I think that the manager and me, the first thing I started to think is like, we need to change our policies and procedures and how we integrate things differently. And I could see someone saying, "Oh, that's more work," and being a little hesitant because mm, mm, mm. Wow. So, what do you feel like this model could be helpful in a social services type of role, or do you feel like there are some industries that this wouldn't be helpful?
I think any team that's open to really listening, using a structure, and then making adjustments, it can be helpful with. It it also works in families and other organizations. The workplace is a place where we spend a lot of time, and there's just a lot of value put on it. Our lives revolve around work in many cases. And so I think it's a powerful place to start. But it can really be used in any group of people where there's a leader who wants to build up other leaders and collaboratively problem solve to support everybody's growth.
Mm. So I'm curious about what happens, and I'm thinking specifically of a family from a long time ago where I had a one parent who was very accepting of that her children needed to learn differently and they needed to shift the ways they did things in their home, and the other parent, I don't believe in this. It's always funny when people tell me I don't believe in this stuff, and like
Mm-hmm.
it exists. So
Mm-hmm.
whether you believe in it or not, And it was just very difficult to have the children grow
Mhm.
and to thrive in that environment because there was a constant doing and undoing of processes. Have you ever seen that in an organization where there was the intent to grow, but maybe they just didn't because of that type of dynamic?
Yeah, and I think it's different with kids versus adults because adults have more autonomy to set a boundary and say, well, I'm going to just go get a different job, or I'm going to do set this boundary or do this. Whereas kids are so dependent on their families to take care of them and can't always necessarily do that. But I think it goes back to that leader who doesn't believe in differentiation or meeting the unique needs of something maybe needs the grow interview done on themselves, that they
Mm,
can really start to gain self-awareness of their own needs, and they likely have been dismissed or not supported in their own growth. And once they work through that, then they can often be more uh, open-minded to supporting other people's growth. So yeah, it's really about empowerment of people and teaching them what are my needs, building that self-awareness, and then how do I ask for what I need, that self-advocacy.
mm,
And when they can be aware and then uh, you know, ask for what they need or create environments that support their needs,
mhm.
then that's all that they can control. And if somebody is really resistant, then they may have to look at setting other types of boundaries for themselves.
Okay. You have me wondering if it's advantageous at the interview stage to ask for some type of accommodation in the interview process, or uh, does that seem as if potential candidates are going to be difficult? Uh, how do you how have you seen people perceive that if they start right off just saying, hey, I need this instead of that?
Yeah, it takes a lot of self-awareness and courage and healing for neurodivergent people to get to the point where they're comfortable asking. Many of the neurodivergent adults that I've worked with in helping them get a job have not been in a place where they feel psychologically safe
Mm,
to share that type of information. And it's really not their fault. It's just not set up for them. Now there are lots of companies who are doing some neurodiversity hiring programs where it's designed to ask people for their accommodations, and they're seeking out neurodivergent candidates because they know the value they bring. And that is a really good way to create that psychological safety for somebody to share their needs and their preferences. Um, if somebody's willing to do that for a job interview, I think it's really powerful and important data for them to decide if they want to work there. The response is going to be very telling about the culture and if it's likely to be supportive or lead to burnout and more frustration or trauma.
I was thinking the exact same thing because if they're not willing to do that small accommodation at the beginning, when it really counts, they definitely won't do that as well. So there's a lot of burden upon. It seems like what you're trying to do is relieve the burden upon the person who's neurodivergent to create their safe space, and you're trying to get the employers and the leaders to acknowledge that people are different and maybe you need to support that in order to get the best out of them.
Right. If they have the privilege and the power of being in that leadership role, then it's important for them to take responsibility to meet that person halfway or more.
Halfway or more, if you want to get the best out of them.
That's
Now,
right.
I'd love to hear a little bit more about, you said in your bio that you are a fam jam dancer. Tell us a little bit about that, what that is.
It's a group cardio fitness dance class that I've been doing for a couple of years. And it was one of my first steps out of my burnout to say, I get this 1 hour a week where I get to do something fun that I loved to do as a child. And it became a routine for me and a community of people where we just rock out. And I love that the dance teacher invites us to perform on stage as backup dancers at his concerts. I even performed at a Tedx event and at big venues around the Denver area. And I just feel like a rock star on stage. It's so fun.
That's beautiful. Yeah, it's really difficult for adults to say, "Hey, do you want to play?"
Mhm.
We're not allowed to do that anymore. So that's just getting in touch with your playful side and just releasing that physically is has been very helpful for you, and seems like it's something that's fun. um I think people put in practices that sometimes that they don't want to do and wonder why they're not successfully remaining resilient and rested because you're doing stuff you don't like.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to be a role model for my family. My kids see that it's okay to take time for yourself and go do things that you enjoy and have some fun. It doesn't have to be all work, work, work all of the time. And so it's been a great practice to have for sure.
Yeah, and that's wonderful when you talk about modeling because I think sometimes kids look at their parents and they're just like, I don't want to be I don't want to be an adult. This does not look fun. They're crabby when they get home. They pass out on the couch and this just doesn't look fun. So we have to shift that thinking that we are more than our jobs.
Exactly. Yep. Have some balance and alignment in life.
So if you could issue a challenge to the audience, um, what would that be?
I would invite them to write down all of their traits about themselves that they may not celebrate, that they see as a deficit, and see if they can reframe any of them as, but what's the superpower or strength in this part of me?
That is beautiful. Could you give one or two examples to kind of help them be able to shift their thinking on that?
So for me, some of the traits that I used to see as deficits were I'm extremely emotionally sensitive.
Mm,
And now I see it as a strength that I'm a highly sensitive person and it makes me very empathetic. And even though I cry easily or have big emotions, that's not a problem with me. My procrastination, I used to think that this was just a really negative trait that I waited to the last minute. And now I see it as, well, my brain sort of thinks through it and needs time. And then I work really well with a deadline and get it all done at the last minute. And so it's a strength that I work in this different way to accomplish my goals. And my perfectionism, I now see it as, well, I have a high standard of excellence and I've learned how to have balance where it's not about pleasing other people, but it's great that I um, see the details and have an idealistic vision for what I want it to look like. So those are some examples.
oh, those are wonderful, wonderful examples. Are you reading any books right now that you just really enjoy?
Um, so I've been reading Your Rainforest Mind by Paula Prober, and it specifically helps teach about giftedness and beyond just the stereotypes of the intellectual traits and really what are all of the sort of emotional and psychological and other cognitive traits that are a part of it that people don't realize.
Okay, beautiful. That's and the author one more time,
Paula Prober.
Paula Prober, and we were about to end, and then I thought of one more question that I just have to ask you. Do you feel like there is a shift in the media or entertainment where neurodivergence is being celebrated, or do you see it as something different?
I see progress. I'm hopeful. It's definitely still perpetuating some stereotypes and deficit thinking in cases, but I'm seeing situations on TV shows and movies where it celebrates people's differences, and it's really exciting to see. So that representation does matter.
Wow, there's a reflection right there in the media. You have been a wealth of information, and I'm so grateful that we had the opportunity to share some of your ideas with emerging leaders and um, executive leaders, so that they can create an environment where everyone feels celebrated, like you said. Any last words before we sign off?
Celebrating neurodiversity is as essential for a successful organization as supporting biodiversity is for a thriving ecosystem.
Very nice. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to another episode of Leadership Beyond Burnout. I'm your host, Dr. Kimberly L. Wilson, and you can find us here every Thursday at 5 p.m. 5 p.m. Eastern and 2 p.m. Pacific. Until next time.